It is of course important that influential columnists, especially on the conservative side, are writing these things in widely read newspapers such as the New York Times, unlike, I think, the paper you mentioned. But of course, serious scholars have been for long expressing the obvious. Let me here quote one of these serious scholars, my colleague and friend from Columbia, Alfred Stepan, professor of political science, who runs at our university the Center for the Study of Democracy, Toleration, and Religion, the mandate of that center being to, I quote, examine the role of religion in world politics and help nurture new approaches to peace and democracy. Here is what Al Stepan answers to the question of the incompatibility of democracy with Islam. I quote him. This view is dangerous and uninformed nonsense. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, and what is not generally realized in American public opinion and in our press is that half of them live in democracies. They live in democratic Muslim majority countries such as Turkey, Indonesia, and Senegal. While India, Stepan adds, while India isn't a Muslim country, we must remember that India has the third largest Muslim population in the world, with at least 160 million Muslims. Moreover, as I document in my newest book, says Al Stepan, in our survey of 39,000 Indians in India, we found that Muslims, Hindus, and Christians all support democracy at virtually identical high levels. I continue Al Stepan's quote, and I'm almost done with that. In Africa, one of those democracies in a Muslim majority country is Senegal. Although extremely poor and facing many challenges, Senegal's Sufi Muslims and French-influenced secularists have found ways to mutually and democratically collaborate. And Al Stepan gives as an example of collaboration here the way in which a very effective anti-female genital mutilation campaign has been designed and implemented in the country of Senegal. So, the reason I have quoted Al Stepan for three reasons here. The first is that he provides the one single best argument that responds to the incompatibility question, which is the production of counterexamples. As you know, any statement that pretends to be universally valid will be destroyed by one single counterexample, that is a law of logic. And in this case, actually, the instances are quite many because the counterexamples actually, when you use those counterexamples used by Al Stepan, you are dealing with half of the Muslim population of 1 billion point 2. The second reason I have quoted Al Stepan for our discussion is that the countries he mentioned are all non-Arab. Because in the minds of many, and not just the woman who declared during the 2008 presidential campaign that Mr. Obama was an Arab, for most of people, the word Muslim is associated with Arab. Actually, Arabs are a minority in the Islamic world. So when you respond to the incompatibility question, well, Senegal is both Muslim and democratic, the skeptics would stop, think twice if they agree, and if they know that Senegal did pass actually the ultimate test of democratic institutions, which is political change, they may ask, yes, but is it really Muslim? Well, yes, it is. And it is a country where the constitution is secular, but where the Sufi brotherhoods are present in the public sphere. I will come back to that aspect. And this is the third reason, having to do with the mention of the Sufi interpretation of Islam and the role it plays in fostering pluralism, openness, and democracy. So the best answer is the kind of counterexamples provided. But there is still the need to examine things at the conceptual level as well, not just the level of facts providing counterexamples. That would not be sufficient, because the point is to look at the conceptual level and what people truly mean when they talk about this incompatibility in definition, by definition, between Islam and modernity. So if there's something in Islam itself that is incompatible with the organization of secular, democratic, open states, one needs to address that question also at the conceptual level, as I have said, because after all, it is the point made by what is called political Islam, that such a state would be by nature un-Islamic, therefore something to be destroyed. So we need to ask what would be an Islamic state. Let me look at history. And first, the recent history of the abolition of the caliphate identified is precisely that Islamic state. And second, the far more distant history of the elaboration of that caliphate. So the response to the question has to address the precise question of the caliphate and what it represented. And here we need to examine a word, the importance of which for the discussion of secularism in Islam cannot be emphasized enough. This work is by the Egyptian thinker Ali Abdel Razak, who died in 1966, and is titled, or is going to be titled when it is published in English, Islam and the Foundations of Power, a research on the caliphate and government in Islam. This is one very important book that was not translated until recently. A colleague and friend of mine who lives in London has just finished translating it into English, and the book should be published in the coming weeks if it hasn't been very, very recent. So what the book does is reflect upon what it meant for the Muslim world and for political philosophy in the Islamic world to have witnessed in October 1923 the end of the official end of Islamic Caliphate, which until then had embodied the very meaning of what an Islamic state is. After the proclamation in October 1923 of the Republic of Turkey, the Ottoman Caliphate, which had remained until then nominally the symbol of the unity and the continuity of a Muslim world, was abolished. That was the official end of the history of an Islamic community created by the prophetic message, even though in fact the notion of a central government effectively in charge of such a community had been for a long time a sheer fiction. In other words, the caliphate, after a few decades actually, never truly functioned as a central power unifying the whole Muslim world. The Abbasid dynasty never ruled the entire Muslim community, but still, because the symbol did exist, it sort of shielded any kind of reflection in the field of political philosophy, because it was there, even though it was merely a fiction. So the abolition of the caliphate did not change much on the ground. Ultimately, the reality of things, but nevertheless, the event was a shock. The notion had been integral to the idea of an Islamic community transcending national borders. The caliph was supposed to be, one of his titles was the protector of Sharia, of the Islamic law. And the Quranic notion of Khalifa, the notion from which the caliphate is derived, Khalifatullah, applied to man, the notion that man, the human being in general, is lieutenant or vicegerent of God, that did not really match the political weight of the caliph when it was applied to that. We can think here of the Indian, actually, Khilafah movement created in the beginning after 1914 with the goal of safeguarding the institution of the caliphate after World War I and the victory of the Allies. This is a moment in Indian history which is very interesting, and again, it is very important to go back to the early 20th century to understand what political Islam is saying today and to try to answer the question of compatibility that I have just raised. In India, after World War I, when Turkey was allied with Germany, so Turkey was among those who lost the war. The fear in the Muslim world was that the British, the Allies in general, the British in particular, would do some harm to the Caliph of nominally the whole Islamic world back in Turkey. So there was a movement that was formed in India called the Khilafat movement to defend the institution of the Caliphate because it was supposed to represent the political reality of the Islamic world. And this Khilafat movement was allied with the party of Congress led by Gandhi, the Mahatma, who then supported it and included the Khilafat movement agenda in his own agenda for independence from the British. The irony of history being that actually the British did not really touch the Caliphate, although Turkey was shrinking back. All the territories under Ottoman rule were taken back, and with mandates given by it was not the UN then, it was the SDN, to the Allied powers. So it was the Turks themselves, the movement led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the Turkish Revolution, that in the end abolished the Caliphate. So when that nationalist movement of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk abolished the Caliphate, it created, and this is my point, it created the obligation to rethink the political question of government in the Islamic world.